Welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast, the resource for transitional and experienced genealogists who want to create a successful business. I'm your host, Miriam Pierre-Louis. Here you'll learn from professionals all around the world who work in the field of genealogy. Are you ready to get started? Then let's get going. This podcast is sponsored in part by the Association of Professional Genealogists. You can find out more about them at www.apgen.org. Hi, everyone. Just a quick announcement before we get started with the show. There will be a free webinar this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and it's called Finding Your Genealogy Niche. So if you need help settling in on a specialty or a niche area to differentiate you from other people in your genealogy business, then this is the webinar for you. Go to the website, thegenealogyprofessional.com, and you'll be able to register and find out all the details there. Welcome to episode 18 of the Genealogy Professional Podcast. Today we head north to Canada to chat with genealogist Lorine McGinnis Schulze. Lorine, welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast.
Hi, Marion, and thank you for having me.
Let's get started by having you tell us about yourself and give us an overview of your genealogy business.
Well, I live in Ontario, Canada. I was born and raised here. I'm on a small hobby farm overlooking beautiful Georgian Bay, which is on Lake Huron. I love to cook. Of course, I'm an avid genealogist, but I also love to cook, and I'm a passionate collector of antiques. I majored in psychology in university, and I do have my teaching degree. I also have 10 grandchildren and 4 step-grandchildren, so Christmas is very active at our house. I started doing genealogy many years ago, age 14. Didn't even know that what I was doing was called genealogy, but I got a book from the local library and just started in, and I've never stopped. My genealogy business is basically writing books, genealogy and history combined. And I also have several dozen websites and blogs, the Olive Tree Genealogy blog and website. And that's about it for my genealogy business, although I do have fingers in other pies too, but they're a smaller aspect of my business.
You had said that you started genealogy when you were very young. What was it that inspired you to go into genealogy professionally?
You know, as I mentioned, I had started quite young, right after my father died, and was always very, very passionate about it, but it was just a hobby. And then my husband died in 1993, the same year I graduated with my teaching certificate, and then the very next year I was injured on the job, and I was off work for almost 2 years in order to keep myself occupied because I was physically immobile. I started writing a genealogy book, which was published in 1996. And that same year, I set up a website. The book was quite successful, much to my surprise. I had thought it would only sell to a segment of the population, but it was quite successful. And basically, it was kind of a domino effect. One event led to another, and then another. And when I went back to work after convalescing, I still worked for a few more years. But then I took early retirement in 2001 to pursue my genealogy business full-time.
What was the topic of that first book that you wrote?
It was actually a book on a specific family in New Netherland, which is present-day New York. But I accidentally stumbled on the Goldilocks formula, the magic formula, which was the first half of the book, it was all about the history of the settlement, the culture, the times. And then the second half was about this one specific settler who happened to be one of my ancestors. And that was a huge hit with libraries in the United States because I had combined the history and the genealogy.
That's very interesting. So the combination of history and genealogy made the book more popular, both to regular genealogical readers and to libraries as well.
Exactly, because if I had written the book simply on my ancestor Van Slyke and, coming down the line, it would have only appealed to descendants of that man. This way, it appeals to the descendants, but it also appeals to historians and libraries in particular. They love the fact that detailed research on the history of the settlement is included.
And you mentioned that it was New Netherland. So was it focused on Albany or Manhattan or?
It was focused on Albany, which was Fort Orange, and New Amsterdam, which is present-day New York City, and the Dutch settlement there in the early 1600s. I've written several books on that. It's kind of my New Netherland project, and I actually call them New Netherland settlers, and then I choose a specific person, whether it's my ancestor or not. I just choose someone that I think is interesting, and I do quite a bit of research on them and put the books together.
I just asked for selfish reasons because I have New Netherland ancestors. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
well,
so I just thought,
you'll have to send the information to me after the podcast, and I can take a look and see what I have in my notes. I also have my own personal library of New Netherland resources.
Oh. Most people come to genealogy from another profession. What were you before you became a genealogy professional?
I was working as a teacher. I started off as a teacher assistant and then a teacher, and I only worked with what we then called behaviorally maladjusted teenagers, and I only worked with the boys.
What did you do to prepare yourself to become a professional genealogist? Now, I imagine at the beginning you just sort of fell into it because you were convalescing and you had that time on your hands. But I'm sure at some moment you thought, wow, I'm going to keep going with this. Did you do anything to prepare yourself, either from an educational point of view or a business point of view, to get your business going?
I really didn't. I don't have any formal business training or the skills that one might think you would need. But my personality, my characteristics that I have, I'm a very determined person. I'm very self-motivated, and I always assume that I will be successful at something if I work hard enough. So as I went along, and as you said, and it really was a domino effect. Just one event led to another, and I really had no plan to develop what I thought of as my hobby into a career. But as it went along and I realized that it was working for me, that the books were popular. Yeah, I'm kind of hesitating over my answer because I wish I could say, oh my gosh, I wrote this wonderful business plan and I focused on it and I, set my goals and did them. But that is not how I did it. And it just came about. I honestly think that because I had worked in this field with these behavior teenage boys, which I loved but was very stressful, because I'd worked in that field for over 20 years, I think I was approaching burnout and, starting to think, wow, I kind of wish there was something else I could do. And it was my brother really who encouraged me, take the leap, do it.
Let me ask you a different...
And the leap being give up your teaching and pursue this full time because you're starting to see success. So if you do it full time, to me, the math said you're going to be more successful.
All right, let me ask you a different question. Because you're self-motivated and because you have that belief in yourself that you can achieve success, and that's half the battle right there. When you start pulling together, for instance, in this case, your book, and you see that it has become successful, do you do sort of a process of self-analysis or project analysis that conscious look to see, okay, what worked and what didn't work? Because that's a form of training as well. And not everybody does that, because it sounds like you knew pretty quickly, wow, I hit on the right formula. So tell me about what goes through your mind when you're creating something and determining whether it's worked or not.
You're absolutely right, Mary, and you hit the nail right on the head. I'll come up with a project idea, whether it's a book or even something else, and I'll, mull it over for a while, think about it, kind of look around on the internet and do a little bit of research, see if I think it's viable, and I will go with it. And as we'll talk about writing the book. As I'm writing the book, I'm always thinking, is this going to be of interest to more than a small segment of the population? And then when I finish the book, I take a really good look at it and I do analyze it. I think, now, is there a way I could set this up or write it that would be more interesting? Do I need to include more detail or more maps or more drawings, or do I need to have less? I'm very analytical. And then when I'm completely finished, and in this case, I'm just talking about my books, when I'm completely finished, I give it to people I call my beta testers, my beta readers. I have 3, and I give them each a copy and have them read through it and give me their honest feedback. Does it work? Does it not work? And I kind of go from there. But yeah, the analysis is very important.
When you give it to your beta readers, what kind of feedback do you get? Are they typically all in agreement, or are they sometimes at odds with their opinions about your work?
So far, I've been lucky in that they've been pretty much in agreement. The 3 that I have that read my genealogy history books, because I write in different genres, the 3 that review my genealogy history books, 1 of them is an avid genealogist, and also my husband, and the other 2 are not genealogists whatsoever. And for me, it's very interesting. My husband's reviews will be much more nitpicky, if you will. He details things that he thinks I should have put in or left out. The other 2 go for what they consider an interesting read. And so I find that very helpful to have the 2 camps. Now, when I write my fiction books, because I'm actually working, I'm on about the 10th draft of, or 10th edit of a genealogical murder mystery set in Salt Lake City, by the way. For that, I have different beta readers because I want to know from them. I don't want an editor. I already have a person who does all that for me. I just want that overall opinion. Did you like it? Was it interesting? Would you like to have more? Would you like to have less? Were the characters believable? And so on.
I absolutely love that one of your editors is genealogy focused and the other 2 are not, because I think that really provides a lot of balance. And I think that might be a perspective that many genealogists might not consider when they're having their books reviewed, because they would think, oh, I need to get a genealogist. I do that quite a lot, too. When I have genealogical problems, I'll go and I'll talk to somebody who doesn't do genealogy just to see if they can figure it out.
Yeah.
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 Now, switching over to your website, you had said you started the website that same year you did your first book. Did you start Olive Tree Genealogy at that point, or was that a different website?
That was the website I started. The internet was in its infancy. That was in the days of battleship gray backgrounds and text on websites, and there weren't very many websites, genealogy websites online. And a very good friend of mine suggested, right after my husband died, that I needed something to help bring me back into life. And he encouraged me to start a website. And I had said, how would I do that? I know nothing about HTML coding. And in those days, there weren't any editors for setting up a website. And I had said to him, I don't know anything about this. I don't know how I could possibly do it. And he just said, I know you well enough to know that you can do it. You can research, you can look online, you can figure out how to do this. And he just kept pushing. And I did it. And it was very difficult. It was a lot of hard work. But I did it. And actually, I was the first website that the new Roots Web, which was brand new, they offered me free space. And I was the first website to be offered that free space, which was kind of cool. And it just took off from there.
And I imagine that you used your same analytical process with your website in that you would test and see how things go and if something didn't work. Can you give an example of something that you did on your website and how you tweaked it to make it better?
Well, when I set the website up, it really, my whole idea was I want to share what I've spent a long time learning. I guess it's the teacher in me. I want to share that with others so that they don't have to look around and look in 25 different books and look around the internet and get all frustrated. They can maybe benefit or just get some help from me summarizing what I've learned on certain topics. And so I started just with my own ancestors, and I started with one ship's passenger list, which had my Dutch ancestor on it. That's bad grammar, but you know what I mean. And I put that up, and it was so popular. I kept getting notes from people, that's so cool. Do you have a ship's list for my ancestor? And then I thought, people are very interested in ship's lists. I guess I'll find more and put more online. And so for me, that's how I do it. I realized that this is popular. And again, this wasn't in any way involving becoming a professional. This was just me wanting to help people and give them what they wanted. So I just began putting more and more ships lists online as I found them, and that's how I do things. I analyze it. That wasn't very hard to analyze since I was getting comments from people, but that's the way I do it. Analyze it, see what people like, put more of that online. If they don't like it, don't put more.
Well, see, I think that's what the difference is, that you're actually taking that step and you're thinking about it. And you're saying, okay, I see this happening. Let me see if I can do more of that. And I think some people don't get to that point, and we need to just come out and say, that's what you need to do. You need to say, you need to, and, you're saying, well, you weren't a business at that point, but you were really at that point. You were growing towards it because, mentally you were already working in that direction because that's just normally how you think anyway. So I think that made it easier for when you did actually start offering, more books and things like that for sale. Now, we talked about how you found the sweet spot with the history genealogy combination. Can you share a story about perhaps an idea that you had that didn't work out, that you had thought, oh, this might be good, and then in the end, it really just didn't pan out, or you had to change it dramatically in order to make it work, either for an audience or for the website or whatever?
I actually can, and it was actually a money idea that I had. I want money making, not getting rich, but just making a little bit of extra money. I thought it was quite a brilliant idea, and it really was, and it sucked, but I didn't know that until I tried it. And it'll sound very simple. At one point in my evolution towards a full-time genealogy business or professional, I started offering lookups. As I mentioned to you, I have a very large and very complete personal library of New Netherland resources. And my husband started buying on eBay old ledger books. And I had what I thought was a brilliant idea. I will offer lookups in the New Netherland documents I have and books. And my husband, I will offer lookups on his ledger books. It was just, I won't say it was disastrous. Nothing terrible happened. It just never took off. And it took about 2, maybe 3 years. And I just decided this is just crazy. I'm giving all this web space up to promote this idea. And what is it making me $30 a year? It's not worth my time and not worth the web space. So, but that's trial and error. I like to do that. I thought it would be really popular and it wasn't. So I learned from that.
Well, I think we all have ideas like that, and which also fizzle. So I think that it's much easier to grow and have successful ideas if you've had a couple of bum ideas. Do you have any sense of why you think it didn't work?
Well, I think the New Netherland one is too specific. There wouldn't be a lot of people that would be interested, and getting the word out there was not quite as easy. Marketing the idea was not as easy as I thought. The ledger book one, I have not yet figured out why that wasn't popular. And I think I'm looking at it with too narrow a focus. I haven't been able to widen my focus to see how someone else might have felt about it. I thought it was absolutely fascinating to find names in this book and something that they bought or used. So yeah, that one I do still think about it, because I obviously, if I know why something didn't work, I can avoid it in the future, or I can try to make it work.
Did you provide an index online so that people could see whether their family name was mentioned in the ledger book or the Netherlands books?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yes, we did.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, tell me about...
But that's okay because I've come up with another idea for utilizing those same books. So.
Oh, sure. And, you know, there's a lesson to be learned in everything. I mean, the benefit is you have the opportunity to learn a lesson from everything that you do. And I think there's always a benefit in that. It's always a good benefit, even if it doesn't work out.
Definitely.
Tell us about when you really started to become a solid business. And you said, you sat back and you said, wow, look at this. And when you wanted to quit your full-time job and when things started to take off, what was that like?
That was, I think it was perhaps a little easier transition for me than it might be for some people because it wasn't a sudden thing. It had evolved. You know, I started the website in 1996. My first book was published then, and it wasn't until 2001, so 5 years later, that I made the decision I am going to quit my teaching job and pursue this full-time, pursue the genealogy business full-time. So it was you might say it was a very gradual transition. It was, my husband always says to me, it was the longest he's ever seen me mull something over and kind of waffle back and forth to do it or not to do it. I don't make quick decisions. I'm very thorough about thinking things through and looking at pros and cons. But on that particular decision to leave teaching, that was probably the most difficult decision I've made, really, not because I was afraid I wouldn't succeed, but I was giving up the financial security and the steady monthly income for absolute unknown. And so that was a bit of a scary time. And I just had to do a lot of talking to myself and thinking, and then just one day saying, okay, I'm doing this. And then once my mind was made up, just doing it and not looking back. No regrets, just full steam ahead.
So have you reached the point now in control of your business where you're comfortable budgeting and you're no longer having that scared feeling?
Absolutely. And in fact, 2 years ago, my husband quit his job and to help me with the genealogy business. And so we both work from home, and everything is good. I really don't. And what I've found is that the income kind of levels out. You'll have surges. I'll write a new book, and so there's a sudden surge in income. But then it will even out, and I can tell it's going to be approximately so much every month. I really don't get worried about it. And as my husband always reminds me, he can always go back out to work if he has to.
You had mentioned the lookups. So you're doing more than just writing books. Was there a time that you were doing client research and then you stopped later?
Yes.
So tell us about how you initially had decided to offer that service and then later what made you decide to discontinue that.
Well, when I first started out and I wrote the book, and it takes me a long time to write a book, so writing one book that does quite well doesn't really put a lot of food on the table after a while. The sales start to peter out. But meantime, I'm working on another book, which might take me 2 years to write, and I needed income in that time. So I started offering, well, you'll laugh at this one. I actually, it's just a little aside before I tell you about the client research. I actually bought one of the very first scanners that was available to the public, and it cost me $1,500, and I think it was in 1993 or 1994. And so once I had written the book in 96, I decided that another thing I could do would be offer scanning services. People would pay me for that. So I did that. That wasn't quite enough. And so then I think it seems really, I suspect that the first thing people think of when they decide they want to become a genealogy professional, I think the first thing they think of doing is client research, because that's what genealogy is all about, isn't it? And so I started to take on clients, and I found that I didn't really enjoy that. I loved doing the research, hated writing the client reports, even though I love writing. I did not like writing the client reports. And I also found that in general, people didn't give me all the information that they already had. And then I would present them with the information I had found, and they would say, but I already knew that. I found it really frustrating. And so once I could kind of set that aside and go into other little sidelines and not have to take clients for client research, I started phasing out. I still occasionally take clients for consultation, which I really like doing. And it's simply me pointing them in the right direction, or what I hope is the right direction, and giving them advice on where to go next or how to analyze documents that they found for clues.
What I'm hoping that everyone listening is hearing, both from this interview and all the previous ones so far, is that there are so many different ways that you can operate a genealogy business. There are so many different opportunities. When I first started, I thought I had to be everything to everybody. I had to offer every service, and I had to do every kind of research. And only as I gained experience and became more confident that I learned that I didn't have to do that. And I think it's great when professionals get to that point where they say, well, no, I'm not comfortable with that. That's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to focus my energy in this direction. And that's when you're really on to something, I think. And that sounds like the transition that you went through as well.
Yeah, very important, very important. Because I think you're just doing a disservice to your own abilities. You're not focusing on what you're best at or what you enjoy most or what you feel most comfortable with. You're just scattered. You're trying to do too many different things, not all of them enjoyable.
Right. And I think it's also a disservice to your clients as well, because if you're not enjoying the work, you're probably not doing your best work. So.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, Lorine, how do you balance paid work versus volunteering?
Volunteering, because I have physical and mobility issues, I don't do any volunteer work that is outside the home. It's too difficult for me. So what I do, first of all, I should say that the bottom line for me is that paid work comes first. We need to eat, we need to pay our bills. But the way that I like to volunteer is there are many different ways. I'm an administrator for over 30 different message boards and mailing lists on RootsWeb. I'm a volunteer host of several Ontario Gen websites and a few American Gen websites. And I also set up a blog called Ask Olive Tree, where readers can submit a challenging question or just something that they're puzzled about, and I will answer that for them or try to steer them in the right direction. Or if it's a question that I find incredibly interesting, which unfortunately I often do, I will actually do research and find things for them. It's all free, of course, because that's the volunteer aspect.
Well, online volunteering is just as time-consuming as face-to-face volunteering, so I think it doesn't really matter which way you do it. I mean, administering websites, that takes a lot of work, and it can be thankless work, too. Yeah. What is the most fun project that you've ever worked on that you can share with us? And it can be a writing project, a research project, or a website project. Well,
actually, I have two that were the most fun, and they're both still active. They're not quite ready, and they're both books. One is a book on children's genealogy activities. I have created a number of various activities to get children involved and interested in genealogy and history. And the fun part of it was not only coming up with ideas for these activities, but I used 3 of my grandchildren as guinea pigs, and they played the games that I created, and they made the crafts that I thought up, and then I also used them as models for the book. And that was just a ton of fun. I loved doing that. And then the second one, which has been tremendously difficult, but also loads of fun, and has now been almost, I hate to even say it, but 4 years, maybe 5 in the making, is my genealogy mystery novel. That has been an adventure on its own and an experience, and I have absolutely loved it, but I've also come up with way more respect than I already had, which was already pretty big, but way more respect for mystery writers. But a ton of fun.
Sounds great. Let's take a quick break to hear a message from the Association of Professional Genealogists.
Hello, this is Kimberly Powell, President-elect of the Association of Professional Genealogists. APG is an international membership organization dedicated to supporting all individuals in the business of genealogy, whether you're an archivist, librarian, educator, writer, or researcher. Our 2,600 members include genealogists at all stages of their professional careers, from those just starting out to some of the field's most renowned leaders. Learn how to grow your business and network with other professionals through our educational webinars, informal mentoring groups, active discussion lists, the APG Quarterly, and our annual Professional Management Conference. Visit us online at apgen.org to learn how we can help you on your professional journey and how you can help us advance public awareness and understanding of the profession of genealogy.
All right, Lorine, the time has come. We are now entering the lightning round. And I'm going to throw at you a whole bunch of questions, and you're going to come back with brilliant answers that are just going to be great advice for all the genealogists out there. Are you ready?
No stress there.
It's not supposed to be stressful. What was the one thing you were most afraid of in starting your business?
The financial uncertainty.
What is the best advice you've ever received?
That would have to be that I should make money. Everyone should make money doing what they love.
What is one specific action listeners can take in the next 24 hours to help them transition into a genealogy career?
I would suggest that you figure out what you absolutely love doing and what you're good at, because that will be the start of your business plan.
Do you have a productivity tool like Dropbox that you love that you can share with our audience?
Absolutely. I use Dropbox, of course, for storage every day, and I use Scrivener for writing, but I would also be absolutely lost without Evernote.
And what is your preferred social media channel?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I'm on all of them, Facebook, Google+, Twitter, Pinterest. I think my preferred would be Facebook.
Lorine, if you can recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be?
Well, I think I have to go with a book about New Netherland. This is an excellent read. It's by Russell Shorto, Shorto, and it's called The Island at the Center of the World. Excellent.
Sounds very intriguing. Okay, hypothetical scenario. You have to move to the United States. You don't know anyone, and you're not familiar with the research and the records because you're not anywhere near New York. So what are you going to do in the first month to hit the ground running and start a new genealogy business?
Well, the first thing I would do is visit the local library of wherever I have moved to and look for genealogy groups to join. If there aren't any, I would start my own and approach the library and ask to put a notice up on, however they have a bulletin board or however they work it to say that I'm starting a genealogy group. And that is how I would try to make contacts and make some connections. I would also look for the local genealogy society and join that.
Give our audience one parting piece of advice and then tell us how we can get in contact with you.
Advice would be, don't just sit around and think about starting your own genealogy business or just talk about it to friends and family. At some point, actually do it. Gather your facts, write out pros and cons. But I would really strongly suggest that you give yourself a deadline for a decision, because you can think about it for years and never actually gather the courage to do it. And to contact me, you can contact me either through my Olive Tree Genealogy blog or website. There is an email at the bottom of every page. Or you can find me on Twitter as Lorine MS. And you can also find me on Facebook and Google+, and on Pinterest. And you can always contact me through those mediums.
Well, you've got all the bases covered.
I hope so.
I'll have links to all of those in the show notes, so people can just go to the genealogyprofessional.com to the episode page, and you'll be able to find the links so that you can track down Lorine on Twitter or wherever. Lorine McGinnis Schulze, thank you so much for coming on the Genealogy Professional podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, Marion. It was a pleasure.
In this episode with Lorine McGinnis Schulze, we learn about someone who focuses on writing books as the main part of their service. And there was a lot of information that we can take away from what she shared with us today, even if we're not writing books. For instance, we talked about analyzing our ideas and offerings and determining which worked and which didn't, and then making adjustments based on that. We can all do that, no matter what our focus is on our services. Lorine also talked about transitioning from a full-time salaried job to a full-time independent genealogy professional business and the financial insecurity associated with that. I imagine that nearly everyone out there can relate to that in some way. If you have a job and you're thinking about leaving it to start a business, then it definitely will make you pause to think, am I doing the right thing? And we also talked about really knowing yourself, your comfort zone, your likes and your dislikes, and letting that be the guide for the direction that you should take in your genealogy business. Now, sometimes that takes a little while. When you first start out, that very first couple of weeks or the first 6 months, sometimes until you do some work for other people, it might be hard to get a sense of what your likes and your dislikes are. So don't be too hard on yourself if you haven't figured that out yet. Give it some time. But as you do gain more experience, try to stay in tune with what those things are. What do you really enjoy doing, and what are some of the things you find yourself putting off and not really wanting to do? Pay attention to that so that as you're developing your business, you can let that guide you in the direction that you should go. Now, each week we need to do an action item. And since Lorine is a writer, I think we should go back to the action item that I gave you in episode 15. And that was where I asked you to determine one or two of your most fun projects. And I also asked you to ask permission from the person who you did that project for so that you can turn that fun project into something written or a presentation that you can share as a learning tool with a wider audience. So now let's take that a little bit further. You thought of your ideas and you got permission. That's already done. So now let's analyze what your fun project is a little bit. And I'm going to put this as a little chart on the Genealogy Professional Podcast website so you can see this. And we're just going to take it bit by bit. We're not going to do anything too drastic today, but what I would like you to do is come up with a title for that project. It doesn't have to be the title that you ultimately use, but you need to start somewhere. So come up with a title and then summarize that fun project from beginning to end. What was it about that project that you liked? How did it start? How did it end? Give a location. Where did that project take place, or were there multiple locations? What was the time frame? Was it in the 1600s? Was it in the 1800s? Was it in just 1 year? Give it a specific time frame. The next line I want you to complete is methodology. What was it about that project that was fun for you in regards to methodology? What particular challenge did you face, and how did you meet that challenge? And then lastly, I want you to write down what was unique or unusual about this project. Was there anything unique or unusual about it? I bet there was if it was your most fun project. So methodology is one thing to help you define, the challenge that you face, but what makes that challenge unique or different from somebody else's challenge? So these are the things that I want you to write down for your action item this week: title, summary, location, time frame, methodology, and what was unique or unusual about the project. And I think that should do it. That should keep you busy. And before we go today, I just want to give a shout out to two folks who left reviews for the Genealogy Professional podcast on iTunes. The first one is Sherry Hudson-Passy, and she writes, "Wonderful podcast, great interviews with many ideas for the professional genealogist and those thinking of becoming a professional. The advice is useful to all, including those who are researching their own family tree." Thank you for that, Sherry. I appreciate so much that you stopped by and left that note. And also Deborah Stewart. She stopped by and wrote, "I was so thrilled to learn about this podcast. It focuses on just where I am in my own genealogy business, transitioning into full-time client work and figuring out where I want to be in the world of genealogy. Marion is a fabulous host, thank you very much, who knows just what questions to ask to get the most out of her interviews. I downloaded one podcast and after listening to it, immediately went back to download all of the rest, and to subscribe to future interviews. Thank you, thank you, thank you to Marian and her guests for continuing to inspire me. Well, thank you, Deborah. It's so nice of you to stop by. I really appreciate you letting other people know that this podcast has been useful to you. That's the whole point here, is that we're trying to help each other. You know, everyone has a certain amount of experience, and that's why our guests on the show are professional genealogists. And we're helping everyone who's listening, and we're helping each other because we're all trying to grow and find our way in this business. So I really appreciate you guys stopping by and helping out with these iTunes reviews, because that helps other people find us in iTunes because of the whole silly little ranking thing that they have in iTunes. And just one reminder before we end the show completely, we do have the webinar, free webinar for the live show this Friday, April 4th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you go to the genealogyprofessional.com to the show notes, you will find the information for registering for that webinar. Until next week, so long.